Okay, now it's time to take a look at the distributed client and take a look at our imports. So we see we're just importing some our helpers and some of the other aspects of the world. Got our exit codes there. Main arguments for this application when you run it from the console then is client node type, A, B, or C, server IP. For most of our earlier examples, that was localhost, server socket 4242, simulated runtime, which is really only valid for node type A. Okay, so we get down into code here. We're going to get our host name, set that as our identifier use that in our global ID. And we do a little bit of work here. Depending on our node type, if it's an A, B, or C, we're going to either create a node type of associated with that. So A's are a distributed originating world, B is a pass-through world, and C is a distributed destination world. And what that kind of correlates then to is A has a normal factory at the beginning, a link, and then it ends in a distributed type of sync that goes out to the repeater. And then B, being the pass-through world, it has a factory that receives from the network. It passes it through on its link, and it ends up on a distributed sync, so that passes it back up to the repeater. The C, being a distributed destination world, it has a factory, receives the information from B's output, runs it across the link, and then it has a normal sync at the end of it all. So we set up our networking. We render the basic structure of the world and the basic vehicle information, which will be empty at the beginning. We do run our simulation, and if it's a node A, we say, give me a little time to start up the other nodes. So here we're running our loop. If we do run a simulation, my node world is operating. Continue going on through there. So this is kind of our simulation there. And then a final shutdown. So that is the client run through. So let's take a look at that world factory. And if we look up here, we see, like I said earlier, so there's our vehicle factory. There's our new world. We're adding it into it. A regular link. Now this is notable. We have a distributed link. So we'll delve into that here in a minute. We add that in. We have our connectors. So that's node A. Now node B, remember, is pass through, and we have a distributed vehicle factory in this one. So that one's going to be the factory receiving off of the network. The distributed links are used to send to the network. So that's that world. And then we have over here, we have node C's configuration, where we have a distributed vehicle factory. Again, cars coming off the network. And then we have, it ends in a regular normal type of sync. So let's take a look at this distributed link. So all we're really doing here is we're just saying distributed. And what we'll get into is later on in the world, we take a look at that link type and we do something a little bit different. So let's come over here and look at our distributed vehicle factory. So on our factory, what we're doing here is we're saying it's a distributed factory, and our get shipment is looking at an incoming vehicle queue, and if it's not empty, we're adding that information to the shipment, removing it from the queue, and returning an unmodifiable list. And then we have this accept traffic information, which basically the world knows about what's going on and sends the car information in here into the factory, and so the factory puts that in a queue, so it doesn't necessarily have to correspond to a time slice on updates. It happens as the information is received, and then when the get shipment happens, that information is then kind of used back on the link. So let's take a look at that distributed world. Those are imports. We've got all our different link aspects of things, and of course we have our concurrency, because the distributed world is not only being distributed in terms of working with the networking stuff, it is also uses the threading from our earlier threaded world too. So we have a default server address that we're working with, but that is also malleable. So we have a hash map here for our factories, and we have a method there for adding our distributed factories. We saw that used earlier, our sockets. So in our setup networking, we get a server socket address and a server socket port, and we put everything together. We build these things up. We create our connection to the server and get our output streams and input streams here. And then so we do a factory listener. So we set up a threaded receiver to send information onto the network factories. So we could have multiple distributed vehicle factories on this local network, but so we have the one thread though that is connected to, it's listening to the actual physical network. So it gets those items off the network, and then it sends it to every, it gets repeated basically into every distributed vehicle factory in the system, so in the local area. So it's kind of neat in that regard, in that we only have one port connection tied up there. So here's our incoming vehicles task. So we're just showing we've started our listener while we're operating, kind of a similar configuration there. While we're operating, we look for our first object, and then once we've got that, we get our second object. First one we're saying is a node ID, second's a vehicle ID. If we've got verbose display set, we're going to just print a lot of information out to the output. There's what we were talking about earlier. If we receive the closed connection, we set our is operating to false. And then for each factory, we're going to send them information. What this is doing is we're looking to see, do we even have distributed factories? If we don't have distributed factories, then we're not going to need to transmit any data onto those factories. For verbose, we're going to say we're transmitting it, and then if we do have those distributed factories, we're going to go through every distributed factory in our list, our collection, and we're going to give them, we're going to do this accept traffic info we saw a minute or two ago. We're going to pass them the node ID it's coming from and the vehicle ID. Our shutdown. So we turn around, and when we get that closed connection, we also broadcast it back out. That that we repeat back out that message, so it kind of bubbles up the chain too. Our finalize there, we're just going through, closing down, shutting everything. Here's our update. This is one of the where everything really happens, the core of things. So we're moving our vehicles and connectors, and move the links. So we'll dig into that. So remove our vehicles and syncs. We saw that was threaded earlier. Now here's where some things get interesting. So we ship off the cars. So the first thing we do is we go through and we remove all of the cars that are in that exit, in this sync. But then we look through our list that we have, and we say, hey, if this sync type that we're going through is a distributed type, then we really want to turn around and we need to ship those cars off to the network. And so when we do that, this is the network broadcast. This is how we do that. So here we get into the network broadcast. We're taking the originating node ID and the car ID, and we're basically writing to our output stream, which is our connection to the server, or the repeater, instance of the repeater class. So we write our originating node ID and our car ID to pass those on. And the rest of everything else pretty much reflects our earlier threaded solution. There's our serial update again of our factories, and here is an interesting part with the distributed factories. So these are the You know, the first part here is the normal factories where, you know, they're actually building them. They're like in the local network. Now here's the distributed one. When we go through those, and we, you know, we're seeing we have our collection of distributed factories. We're going to get, see here, our connector ID given the factory, and then we're going to go through and we're going to get our shipment. We're going to introduce some wiggle room to them, and you know, so we're adding those onto our new location. So that's kind of what we do there. So overall, now you've seen the clients, the world factory, the distributed link, the vehicle factory, and how it all comes back together in the distributed world.